Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Welcome back to Daily Dose Radio. This is your home for verse-by-verse Bible study through the Psalms, and this week we're studying Psalm 105, and today we're looking at verses 11 through 15. And I mentioned, I think on Monday, at the very beginning of the psalm, we talked about 1 Chronicles chapter 16. 1 Chronicles chapter 16 really stands out as a template for several psalms. We've seen it principally in Psalm 96. In Psalm 96, we have verses 23 through 33 quoted and used as part of Psalm 96. Here, in Psalm 105, we have verses 8 through 22 being quoted and used to help us kickstart this idea of God's wondrous works throughout the history of His people. This is not a didactic psalm or a teaching psalm. This is a psalm of praise for what God has done. So we have 1 Chronicles 16, 8 through 22 being quoted here, and we come to the end of that quotation today with verse 15. And tomorrow and Friday, we're going to look at 16 through 24, which is where the psalmist now departs from 1 Chronicles 16 and David's psalm, or David himself does, and starts telling us about more of this history of God's great work towards His people in the past. All right, so let's read today verses 11 through 15. Saying unto thee, will I give the land of Canaan, and the lot of your inheritance, when they were but few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it. When they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, He suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, He reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. So this is pre-Egyptian life with the patriarchs. We had the patriarchs mentioned in 6 through 10, the covenant that was made and confirmed with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then, of course, he also mentions Israel, and I think mentioning Israel sets us up for later on when he's going to talk about Israel coming out of Egypt. So the covenant is also renewed with the people after the Egyptian captivity. But we're beginning now this pre-Egyptian existence when Abraham was in the land, when Isaac was in the land, when Jacob was in the land. None of them lived in the same place. They were all over the map. You remember, Abraham went through the land. He dwelt at Hebron. Then he went down to Egypt. Then he came back north again. Isaac, when he was in the land, he lived north of Hebron, and he lived in the area of the Philistine nations. And the king Abimelech, you remember him, was his neighbor, and they had a covenant with one another. And then Jacob, he left the land, and he went up to Padanaram to find a wife. And then he came back, and he dwelt in tabernacles there in the Judean highlands, where he buried Rebekah, or where he buried Rebekah. He dwelt up there by Bethel and Ai and those places. Well, they're all over the place, and this psalm records that for us. They were few men in number, strangers in it. They went from one nation to another, one kingdom to another people. So they're just kind of all over the place, and it's just this little band. Not even a little band. I mean, at first it's just Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and his brother Ishmael. So just a few, and then the servants and people that worked for Abraham. But then Isaac, he had, his wife, and he had his sons Jacob and Esau. So just a few that were covenant bearers. And then when Jacob came back, he had 12 sons, and then he had daughters, and he had 2 wives. So still just a few. And they're wandering all over the place. And remember that it says here, He suffered no man to do them wrong. He reproved kings for their sakes. And then 15, we have that famous verse, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm, which this particular verse comes over into the Psalter, and it also comes over into the New Testament as proof that God's choosing of this people, He was going to maintain His covenant by protecting them, and He did. And you recall the encounter with Abimelech in Isaac's story, and with the Pharaoh of Egypt in Abraham's story, He kept those nations from harming the covenant bearers. And he still does that today, ladies and gentlemen. He is watching over his word to perform it. Okay, well, I hope you'll join me again tomorrow as we look at verses 16 through 20 on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.